I'm going to just review some other things about going into this particular barn that we're looking at and what we need to achieve as we go into it, and then look at some comparisons of the two systems. But we're going into this, and we're just giving you sort of a weekly chore list that you would have, but you'll have sows going into weaning, and that really starts the beginning of that cycle on day 0. You'll breed that sow probably the following Tuesday, plus or minus a couple days. That'd be roughly day 5, and then we'll have preg check probably on the 34th day or so that they come into that gestation unit, and that's about 29 days of pregnancy. And during all that time, you've built 120 stalls or spaces for sows for each of those weeks. When we come now to the gestation, where after preg check, we've cut our number of sows down to 108 because we feel we lose about 10%. And so we have the gestation there, and then we have provision for recovery or relief pens here. And we're using 4 here. That's about 4% of your herd. And really this will vary in terms of the housing system that you're using. The ESF should be a bit lower than that. And if you were floor feeding, it would probably be a bit higher than that you would need. We then go on to farrowing, moving them out on about a day 108. And so there you'll have 108 stalls there. Then we come back to weaning again 140 days later. So it is a 20-week cycle that we're looking at for these sows. If you look at it now in terms of the housing we provide, we have this breeding period here where we're providing 120 sow spaces per week. And if we're looking at stalls, we have 6 weeks of that. Because they're in there for 39 days, and that gives us 720 spaces. When we go to gestation, we're going to have 11 weeks that we have to provide housing for. We have about 108 spaces, so we need 100 or almost 1,200 sow spaces there. Then we look at recovery. We have 44. That would be the total there. Down here, we move the farrowing, and then we have the 432 in farrowing. But I want to point out here that although it's from 0 to 140 days, which is 20 weeks, we actually need 21 weeks of housing. Because we have periods in here where the farrowing barn is empty, even if it's only for a day, it means that you've got some space somewhere in that barn that doesn't have sows in it. And so you end up providing 21 weeks of housing. If you're looking at gestation stalls, the simple thing is you're going to have stalls for the sows during breeding and gestation. You may have some recovery pens in there, and then you have crates. If we look at the short stalls that we're looking at, we have just the breeding stalls here. In gestation, we'll go into groups, and so now we have, we're going to be using groups of about 10 sows per pen. So our barn's going to have 11 pens there, one for each 11 for each week, so 121 pens for gestation. Recovery, a pen a week, 11 pens there, and farrowing the normal type there. Going to electronic sow feeders, we have the same breeding stalls. In gestation, I'm going to show you in my first example where we're going to divide them into a sow pen and also have a gilt and first parity pen. The gilt pen because we're going to be training them in there, and we'll include the parity 1 sows there as well. So we have 11 ESF pens for the gilts and parity 1, and 11 ESF pens for the sows, recovery pens, and then the crates. So I wanted to look at the question of sow care in the two systems, the short feeding stalls and the ESF. I want to look at just a few chores here that are part of our sow care. Controlling aggression, maintaining feed level, sows off feed, sows that are underfed, sow injuries, and then sorting animals. When we're looking at reducing aggression, bringing sows together, there are 2 things that we would probably recommend that you would do to try to reduce aggression. The more familiar the group is with each other, that is, the more sows that are in this group that you're forming today that were together in the last gestation, the less aggression you're going to have. They remember each other. and so they settle it very quickly. So what you try to do is to form them into groups of already familiar animals. Now, in the ESF, you're working with groups of 60 animals or so in there, and so you're always going to have a significant amount of turnover with that larger group. In the short stalls, you may be able to get some groups that are entirely familiar, that they were retained from the previous group, or you'll be able to reduce the amount of unfamiliarity that's in the group. So that's one way of trying to reduce aggression after regrouping. The other one is to give the sows an extra feed before they move them down. If you feed your sows in your breeding stalls at 8 o'clock, give them another feeding at 8:30 and move them down at 10. Get them so that they're good and full before they move down to the next area. If you're looking at feeding-associated aggression, that is the fighting that happens when you feed them, which is quite different than the regrouping. This is where the competitive system comes in. On the short stalls, you're going to get quite a bit of fighting. And here, what you have to do is you have to try to sort them, and you sort them primarily in terms of the amount of feed that they're going to get, so that all the sows in that group get the same amount of feed. You want them finishing up at the same time, so you want to sort them by size. So your group size here tends to get smaller and smaller as you try to reduce the aggression that's going to go on at the time that you feed them. With the ESF, the sorting here is more in terms of how well they know how to use the ESF. So you would keep your gilts away from your larger sows because the gilts still have to learn to use the system, or they'll be intimidated by the dominant sows. But it is not going to be a case where they're actually fighting to try to get food. The only thing that they're accessing is getting into the feeding station. And the dominant sow doesn't get any more food if she wins a fight and then goes into the station first. She's limited in how much food she gets, so it's not a competitive feeding situation. In here, though, we do have the very large groups of 60, or if you have multiple stations, 120, 180, or 400 sows in one group. And these larger groups have a different type of social hierarchy, and you'll reduce the aggression by doing that. If we look at the problem of maintaining feeding level, okay, how do you know that your sow's getting the appropriate amount of food? Well, in a short stall, you go out there and you say, this group of stalls, this pen, are supposed to be getting, a 4-pound drop. So you just go in and you measure how much is dropping. You set it for those sows. Every sow in that pen gets a 4-pound drop. In the ESF, one of the things you have to do is you have to program every sow into the ESF, into the computer, before she goes into the pen, so that you know that she's in there, and when she goes into the stall, she will get feed. Then you also check and adjust your water and feed drops for the station. How often do you check and adjust? Well, I could say you check and adjust them just as often as you do your gestation stalls now. And then you can tell me how often you adjust. Okay. If we go into a sow is off feed, what's the different management styles here? If you have short stalls, you're going to have to be there to see them eat. In a gestation stall like we normally have now, you can walk by 2 hours after you feed them, and you can tell which sow is off feed. You can't do that in a short stall, because 20 minutes after she's fed, another sow is going to kick her out and eat the rest of her food. So if you come back in 25 minutes, all the food is gone. So you have no sows off feed. You have to be there during the time of feeding. In the ESF, you don't have to be there at all. You come in at 7 o'clock the next morning, look at the printout, and it tells you which sows haven't been eating. Okay. The causation, though, can be different. For the short stalls, it's usually the sow is unwell or she's lame, and that happens in the ESF as well. But in the ESF, it could be that the sow is intimidated. She simply won't walk by other sows in order to get into the feeding station. And so that's another reason. She could be quite healthy, interested in eating, but she's just intimidated in the group. The action in the short stalls, you're going to have to move them to a relief pen. And in the ESF, you can move to release. Or if it's a case of intimidation, you can simply put her into a pen where she will not be intimidated. Every week you're starting up a new pen of Gilt and Prairie 1 sows. An older sow could be moved into that pen on the day that they go in. It's not going to increase your aggression there, and she's not going to be intimidated in there like she would have been with some of the larger sows she was housed with before. If a sow is underfed, in both systems, you watch the body condition and you're saying this sow just is not getting enough food, and you don't think that it's due to the fact that she is lame or etc. So what happens in the short stall? It's tough. You cannot simply adjust one feeder in that pen and hope that that sow gets into that feeder every time. It won't happen. Because she's in a pen, everybody gets the same amount of feed, and you can't change that. So you can be there and you can try to top up by hand, but if you have to top up too much, a dominant sow is going to push her out and you can't stop it. You can't change pens. You can't move her to another pen because that would upset the social structure and you'd have a great deal of aggression. So your solution there, if she's considerably underfed, is to move her to a relief pen. So that could just be that you made a mistake when you were body condition scoring her at the beginning and saying she needs 4.5 pounds of feed, and then you find out she actually needs 5.5, and you're going to have to pull her out to a relief pen in that system. In the ESF, you see a sow that's thin, you just go into the computer and program in an extra pound a day, and it's done. With sows that are injured, how do you find them in the short stalls? Well, you walk through the pen. Same thing with an ESF, but also on an ESF, check your attention list each day. And if she's injured, she may not have been eating the previous day, and so you have a good idea that she's going to be there when you walk through. So it's an aid there in terms of identifying those sows. In both cases, you'd move them to a relief pen. What about sorting? We've got one sow, and you want to get her out of that pen. In a short stall system, you've got one sow out of 10 to take out, and that can be done, but it's a case of hand sorting. In the ESF, you may want to remove one sow out of a group of 60 or more than that. There's various ways of doing it. If you know which sow you want, and that sow is eating, you can program your ESF to simply paint her that day, or you can program the ESF to drop her out, sort her out by itself, so you can do it electronically. Or if she's not going through and you need to find her, you can go through with a handheld device to identify her and then do some hand sorting, which takes a little bit more work in a group of 60 than in a group of 10. But if she's a healthy sow, she just needs to be removed for perhaps you want to do a vaccination or something like that, or some particular treatment to a sow. ESF will sort them out for you. Don't think that you have to go in and find every sow in there for something like that. Okay. And what then do you look for in your staff? In the short stalls, it tends to be animal-oriented. A lot of these things you have to be there, watch the sows, walk through the pen, etc., to find out what's happening. It is schedule conscious because you have to be there to observe feeding. If you have a person that can't get there on time, then you might as well have a person that's not there at all because they're not going to be there during the feeding. And then it is something that one person can do most of these jobs. In the ESF, you're looking for people that are both technical and animal-oriented. Often, if you're having to move sows, etc., one person will handle the system most days, but there'll be times when you'd want an assistant to help them. And can you attract a technical person to your farm? And this, I would say 10 years ago, was a much greater issue. Can you find a person that likes working with computers and also likes working on a pig farm? I had a friend who went to ESF, and a few months later he told me, he says, you know, this is causing problem because my staff member does not handle computers well. He just does not interact with them. He doesn't want to sit down at a computer. And he says, what's going to happen is that I'm going to lose a staff member that has been very valuable to me over the years. The staff member did not fit the system, or he chose a system which did not fit his staff. However, today, we have more tech-savvy youth, and we have better systems that are much easier to program. So we should not see as much of that problem. Now I want to get back to actually taking this barn now, and how do you go about converting it from gestation stalls to a ESF system. So here's what we're looking at in terms of general sow flow. Here's some considerations I have. I want to retain the flooring. I don't want to be breaking up concrete and tearing it out. I want to use the solid areas for lying as much as possible and the slatted areas for sow movement. Because of the design and the fact that I've got disproportionate ratios and design of the solid and the slatted area, I'm providing extra space for the sows here compared to what I would do in a new build. I'm going to let the sows figure out how they can use the lying space and the movement space, but because it is confounding to them, it isn't the perfect design, I expect they'll need more space. The gilts must be trained. I'm using the assumption here that I'm going to be training them after we breed them, and so I'm going to set up a modified one-pass system for that. That means that I'm going to need a gilt pen for each week for training. And then I'm going to limit my sows to 60 per station. And so I take my oldest 60 sows, put them into a sow station, and the P1s, or the leftovers, I will move in with the gilts so that I can fill that pen as well. So I should have 2 pens, 60 sows, and 48 gilts and P1s. So here we have the pens that we're going to be using. We'll have to have 120 stalls, or 720 stalls, 11 gilt pens, 11 sow pens, recovery pens, and then farrowing. If you think of this barn that we have a floor that goes from one side of the building over to the other, where we've got 3 feet of solid alley, we've got 4 feet of solid stall, we've got 8 feet of slat behind the stalls, and we come back to solid stall, solid alley, solid stall, slat, etc., and it repeats itself across the barn. I'm going to take half of the barn here to use as one replicate here. That's going to be 36.5 feet wide, and we're going to have a solid area, slat, a wide solid area, slat, and then a partial solid area there. So we end up with this pen here, solid, a slatted area, solid, slat, and a solid area here. For the gilt pen, I want 48 animals. I'm going to provide 20 square feet per animal. We would suggest that you could get by with less than that, except for the confounding that we have, that the slats and the solid are not well suited for these pigs. I want 960 square feet, so it gives me a pen 36.5 by 26. And so then I go in, I put in my feeder at one end like this, an entrance area and an exit. I put in a central division here to cause sows to move around so that they're not going immediately from the exit into the entrance again. I'm putting in rest areas, these partitions along the solid areas so that they have defined spaces for a group of sows to lie in the solid pen. And I have also put in drinkers at the entrance and exit because sows tend to be prepared to drink when they're waiting to go into the ESF. And when they come out, they may still be thirsty because drinking is typically associated with eating. However, I would recommend an ESF always operate with water within the station as well. Now, training these gilts, I'd put them in on the first day, essentially leave the pen as it is. We will see the animals go in. We will see some aggression that happens. We will see the P1s who have learned this system before go through and eat. And some of the gilts will start learning the system as well. And they'll spend a lot of time sleeping. When sows come together, it may surprise you, but they will spend less than 10 minutes per animal fighting in that first day. It is not a great deal of time of fighting. It looks intense, and some animals do it more than others, but the average is less than 10 minutes. So let's go to the second day when we start the training, and this is what we call a one-pass system. We come in the morning, put up a gate here. This area is now clear of sows. Everyone's out here. They're going to have to pass through the feeder, and once they do, they're through, and they're not going to get back that day. But when you come in a few hours later, you can move the gate over. A few hours later, you move it again, and before you leave for the night, you need to get your on-fed animals up here, your fed animals out here. These need to have enough, you have to have enough space here for all the animals, because hopefully in the morning you come through and everyone has fed. Well, this is something that you would do for 3 or 4 days in the first week. Probably on the weekend, you'd go back to this, where you simply let them go. And then the following week, for 2 or 3 days again, you would do the one-pass system, and that generally will end up training your animals. So we also have sow pens. In this case, again, I'm giving more space than what some people would suggest, but we're looking at 1,300 square feet, so we have a 36 by 36 pen. And again, I outfit it this way with the feeder in some partitions. If we're looking at relief pens, what I've done here is I've taken 2 gestation stalls, took out the center divider, and that's the relief pen I'm using. It's 4 by 7. It allows the animals to stand and lie with ease. It would be difficult for them to turn around in. And this may not be an ideal relief pen, but it's what I've chosen on this particular retrofit. It should work for lameness. Once the sow has gotten over her lameness, in group housing, if it's been a short enough period of time, you could return her to the same pen, or we are forming new groups every week. You could put her into a group that's newly formed. You just have to remember to pull her out before she farrows. So putting it into that barn, we've got the outside of the barn. We've got areas that are reserved now for stalls. And that will take care of the 120 stalls that you need. I've got pens in here for gilts. I've got pens over here for sows, and I have relief pens situated here. We've had to put in some cross alleys, and that caused a problem fitting in the gilt and the sow pens because they didn't fit exactly. So I've had to adjust them a bit. So some would be a little bit shorter and some a little bit longer than what that basic design was, so that we would have a cross alley that would cross the entire thing. Now, having done that, I'm short 4 sow pens. There's not enough space to put them in. And so I need an additional 4,800 square feet of sow pens. So what I need is an additional 12.5% of space by making the conversion from gestation stall to ESF with a fairly abundant space allowance there. When we're looking for the extra space, I can build 4 pens like this, where I have 4 pens, each with 1 group, and so I would put in group A here, next week group B, next group C, next week group D. Or I can go to a dynamic system where I put in A on the first week, the next week I put in B into the other pen. I guess it's 6 weeks later I put in F, and then I put in G. When A goes out to farrowing, the very next week I put another group in. You can do that. These sows are mid-gestation at that point, and it's okay to put another group in. If I had A and B in here, which is what many people would do, I end up losing a pen. Because when I pull A out, B is still there, so the next week I can't put a new group in, because I've got a group in there that's less than a week from farrowing. I don't want to put them through regrouping aggression at that point. So I essentially have to leave it for another week before I can come in. So you end up losing space that way. This group here would work. A, 3 weeks later D, 3 weeks later G, and 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later J. Then 2 weeks later, A would go out and I'd move another group in. I don't particularly like that 2-week gap there, but it will work. Now, could we get additional sow space in there had we reduced the amount of space per sow? That is, would get another sow pen in. Reducing the allowance on gilts and sows by 1 square foot per animal does not give me enough space for another sow pen. So there's no point doing just 1 square foot. If I reduced it 2 square feet, I could. If I reduced it 2 square feet, but if I reduce it to 2 square feet, then I expect I'm going to start having some problems come in. What about the relief pens? If we didn't have relief pens, I could put in more sow pens. Well, relief pens are strongly encouraged. I didn't necessarily put in the 44 because I don't think we need it for ESF, but we should have some. Can we use larger dynamic pens? These are most suitable for sows, and they work best if there is a 12-week system. This is an 11-week system, 11 weeks of gestation. 12 weeks would allow you to have a pen that every 3 weeks you put another group in, or every 4 weeks you put another group in, and you have a nice even flow. Can we work with 12 weeks? You can, but you have to preg check about a week earlier and move the sows quickly. But you can operate a 5-week breeding and a 12-week gestation cycle. Now, the previous conversion, I went in and I forced the pen design in order to make full use of the space in the gestation barn. I'm going to take a different approach to fit a better pen design into that barn, but in doing so, I realized there might be space I cannot use. So I'm going to go to longer, narrower pens with 1 row of lying bays in it. And I'm going to assume here that gilts are pre-trained so I can put the sows and gilts in the same pen. And we'll see, and instead here, instead of building an extra addition to the barn, I'm going to talk about reducing the sow herd inventory in order to fit everything in. So here, we're looking at this design here where I have 8 feet of slat, and then I have 11 feet of solid floor, and make that the basic pen. And that repeats itself 3 times in that building. This is the basic pen I'm talking about now, 90 feet long. We're going to have providing less space per animal because it's a better design. You'll see this design out there in terms of just a recommendation if you had a fully slatted floor, a system like this. Multiple feeders, 2 to handle the 90 sows we have in here. 11 feet of solid space there, 8 feet of slat, some dividers along the solid area there, so that you can have the lying bays. I've done one thing here. I've shortened the divider in 2 cases across from the feeder to provide a little bit more space for access around. When we put that into an existing structure, we found that we're only breeding 100 sows per week instead of 120. And we're going to be going down to 90 animals into the stations. So we have our stall areas here. We have relief pens, and we now have 12. I've reduced it so we have a 12, went to a 12 gestation week cycle there, 12 pens that are ESF. And we have an area over here that's a solid floor that really doesn't fit into that pen design. And so it becomes essentially wasted space, or we will use it for the sows from here when they're ready for farrowing. We will empty them out into here, sorting them through the feeders. These pens are set up adjacent to each other, so when this pen empties for farrowing, the next day you set this pen to dump the sows into this pen, and this pen then to dump sows into here, so that you're not moving sows from pen to pen. It will, the system will do it on its own. What happens? We reduced our breedings by 17%. So, ESF conversions. ESF uses these large pens. And getting those pens to fit into a confined space is just more difficult. It's more difficult to put a bunch of large balls into a box than it is putting a whole bunch of small balls into a box. When you're required to fit over an existing floor pattern, it's going to limit you even more, and that's where I recommend using a bit more space. The pen size may also be compromised by the existing breeding plan. We were working with 120 sows bred a week, and that works just fine. If I had 140 or 150 being bred a week, I would have to modify the design, probably have to use some dynamic pens, because 140 doesn't give me, well, I have to have 2 groups or 3 groups in order to accommodate that. And 2 groups would be over 20 or 60 animals each. I can expect a loss of 10 to 20% in sow numbers or the subsequent increase in space that I have to provide for the animals in making the conversion. Now I would say, point out that this conversion is into a partially slatted gestation barn, where you are stuck with the floor layout that you have. And so I've provided additional space in order to accommodate that. If I were going into a fully slatted gestation barn, it would be far easier to make this design and would be much closer in terms of the actual amount. In actual fact, in a gestation barn like we had here, a sow takes up 19.5 square feet. That's what is provided for each sow in a gestation stall barn. And we're operating these systems perhaps at 19 square feet per sow, but you also have to take into account the relief pens as well.